Hello, and welcome to Bookspot. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of The Star Beast by Robert Heinlein. Our large friend Lummox is in trouble with the law and has been hailed to the courthouse. Not into it, he doesn't fit, but he's in a big cage outside. And Mr. Greenberg of Spatial Affairs is conferring with the local judge. From what young Stewart tells me, I am certain that this case is not one calling for intervention under the Federation's xenic policies, even though the center of interest is an extraterrestrial, and therefore a legal cause for intervention if needed. Although the department has the power, that power is exercised only when necessary to avoid trouble with governments of other planets. Earth has hundreds of thousands of ET animals. It has better than 30,000 non-human Xenians, either residents or visitors, having legal status under treaties as human, even though they are obviously non-human. Xenophobia being what it is, particularly in our cultural backwaters. No, I wasn't referring to Westville. Human nature being what it is, each of those foreigners is a potential source of trouble in our foreign relations. Forgive me for saying what you already know. It is a necessary foundation. The department can't go around wiping the noses of all our xenic visitors, even those that have noses. We haven't the personnel and certainly not the inclination. If one of them gets into trouble, it is usually sufficient to advise the local magistrate of our treaty obligations to the Xenian's home planet. In rare cases, the department intervenes. This, in my opinion, is not such a case. In the first place, it seems that our friend Lummox here is an animal under the law, and— Was there a doubt? The judge asked in astonishment. There might have been. That's why I am here. But despite his limited ability to talk, his other limitations would keep such a breed from rising to a level where we could accept it as civilized. Therefore, he is an animal. Therefore, he has only the usual rights of animals under our humane laws. Therefore, the department need not concern itself. I see. Well, no one is going to be cruel to him, not in my court. Certainly. But for another quite sufficient reason, the department is not interested. Let us suppose this creature is human in the sense that law and custom and treaty have attached to that word since we first made contact with the great race of Mars. He is not, but let us suppose it. Stipulated, agreed Judge O'Farrell. We stipulate it. Nevertheless, he cannot be a concern of the department because— Judge, do you know the history of the Trailblazer? Vaguely, from grammar school days. I'm not a student of spatial exploration. Our own Earth is confusing enough. Isn't it, though? Well, the Trailblazer made 3 of the first interspatial transition flights, when such flights were as reckless as the voyage of Columbus. They did not know where they were going, and they had only hazy notions about how to get back. In fact, the Trailblazer never came back from her 3rd trip. Yes, I remember. The point is, young Stewart— I can't call him by his full name, it doesn't seem right. Stewart tells me that this loutish creature with the silly smile is a souvenir of the Trailblazer's 2nd cruise. That's all I need to know. We have no treaties with any of the planets she visited, no trade, no intercourse of any sort. Legally, they don't exist. Therefore, the only laws that apply to Lummox are our own domestic laws. Therefore, the department should not intervene. And even if it did, a special master such as myself would be obliged to rule entirely by domestic law, which you are better qualified to do than I. Judge O'Farrell nodded. Well, I have no objection to resuming jurisdiction. Shall we go in? Just a moment. I suggested a delay because this case has curious features. I want to refer back to the department to make sure that my theory is correct and I have not missed some important precedent or law. But I'm willing to withdraw at once if you can assure me of one thing. This creature, I understand that despite its mild appearance, it turned out to be destructive, even dangerous? O'Farrell nodded. So I understand, unofficially, of course. Well, has there been any demand that it be destroyed? Well, the judge answered slowly, again unofficially, I know that such a demand will be made. It has come to my attention privately that our chief of police intends to ask the court to order the animal's destruction as a public safety measure. I anticipate prayers from private sources as well. Mr. Greenberg looked worried. As bad as that? Well, Judge, what is your attitude? If you try the case, are you going to let the animal be destroyed? Judge O'Farrell retorted, Sir, that is an improper question. Greenberg turned red. I beg your pardon, but I must get at it in some fashion. You realize that this specimen is unique? Regardless of what it has done or how dangerous it may be, though I'm switched if I'm convinced of that, nevertheless, its interest to science is such that it should be preserved. Can't you assure me you will not order it destroyed? Young man, you are urging me to prejudge a case, or a portion of a case. Your attitude is most improper. Chief Dressier chose a bad time to come hurrying up. Judge, I've been looking all over for you. Is this hearing going to take place? I've got 7 men who... O'Farrell interrupted him. Chief, this is Mr. Commissioner Greenberg. Mr. Commissioner, our Chief of Safety. Honored Chief. Howdy, Mr. Commissioner. Gentlemen, about this hearing, I need to know... Chief, the judge interrupted brusquely, just tell my bailiff to hold things in readiness. Now leave us in private, if you please. But... The chief shut up and backed away while muttering something excusable in a harassed policeman. O'Farrell turned back to Greenberg. The commissioner had had time during the interruption to recall that he was supposed to be without personal emotions. He said smoothly, I withdraw the question, Judge. I had no intention of committing an impropriety. He grinned. Under other circumstances, I might have found myself slapped for contempt, eh? O'Farrell grudged a smile. It's possible. Do you have a nice jail? I have over 7 months' leave saved up and no chance to take it. You shouldn't overwork, young man. I always find time to fish, no matter how full the docket. Allah does not subtract from man's allotted time those hours spent in fishing. That's a good sentiment, but I still have a problem. You know that I could insist on postponement while I consult the department. Certainly. Perhaps you should. Your decision should not be affected by my opinions. No, but I agree with you. Last-minute postponements are vexatious. He was thinking that to refer to the department in this odd case meant to consult Mr. Kiku, and he could hear the undersecretary making disgusted remarks about initiative and responsibility, and, for heaven's sake, couldn't anyone else around this madhouse make a simple decision? Greenberg made up his mind. I think it best for the department to continue intervention. I'll take it, at least through a preliminary hearing. O'Farrell smiled broadly. I had hoped you would. I'm looking forward to hearing you. I understand that you gentlemen from the Department of Spatial Affairs sometimes hand out an unusual brand of law. Really? I hope not. I mean to be a credit to Harvard Law. Harvard? Why, so am I. Did they still shout for Reinhardt? They did when I was there. Well, well, it's a small world. I hate to wish this on a schoolmate, but I'm afraid it's going to be a hot potato. Aren't they all? Well, let's start the fireworks. Why don't we sit en banc? You'll probably have to finish. They started back to the courthouse. Chief Dressier, who had been fuming some distance away, saw that Judge O'Farrell had forgotten him. He started to follow, then noted that the Stewart boy and Betty Sorensen were still on the other side of Lummox's cage. They had their heads together and did not notice that the 2 magistrates were leaving. Dressier strode over to them. Hey, inside with you, Johnny Stewart. You were supposed to be in court 20 minutes ago. John Thomas looked startled. But I thought, he began, then noticed that the judge and Mr. Greenberg had gone. Oh, just a minute, Mr. Dressier. I've got to say something to Lummox. You've got nothing to say to that beast now. Come along. But, Chief, Mr. Dressier grabbed his arm and started to move away. Since he outweighed John Thomas by nearly 100 pounds, Johnny moved with him. Betty interrupted with, Deacon Dressier, what a nasty way to behave. That's enough out of you, young lady, Dressier answered. He continued toward the courthouse with John Thomas in tow. Betty shut up and followed. She considered tripping the police chief, but decided not to. John Thomas gave in to the inevitable. He had intended to impress on Lummox at the very last minute the necessity of remaining quiet, staying put, and not eating the steel bars. But Mr. Dressier would not listen. It seemed to John that most of the older people in the world spent much of their time not listening. Lummox had not missed their exit. He stood up, filling the enclosed space, and stared after John Thomas while wondering what to do. The bars creaked as he brushed against them. Betty looked back and said, "Lummox, you wait there, we'll be back." Lummox remained standing, staring after them and thinking about it. An order from Betty wasn't really an order, was it? There were precedents in the past to think over. Presently he lay down again. Chapter 4. The Prisoner at the Bars. As O'Farrell and Greenberg entered the room, the bailiff shouted, "Order in the court!" The babble died down, and its spectators tried to find seats. A young man wearing a hat and hung about with paraphernalia stepped into the path of the two officials. "Hold it," he said, and photographed them. "One more, and give us a smile, Judge, like the commissioner's just said something funny." "One is enough, and take off that hat." Farrell brushed past him. The man shrugged, but did not take off his hat. The clerk of the court looked up as they approached. His face was red and sweaty, and he had his tools spread out on the judge's bench. "Sorry, Judge," he said. "Half a moment." He bent over a microphone and intoned, "Testing, 1, 2, 3, 4, Cincinnati, 66. He looked up. "I've had more grief with this recording system today. You should have checked it earlier. So help me, Judge, if you can find anybody—" Well, never mind, I did check it. It was running sweet. Then I switched it on at 10 minutes to 10, a transistor quit, and it's been an endless job to locate the trouble. "All right," Farrell answered testily, annoyed that it should happen in the presence of a distinguished visitor. "Get my bench clear of your implements, will you?" Greenberg said hastily, "If it's all the same to you, I won't use the bench. We'll gather round a big table, court-martial style. I find it speeds things up." O'Farrell looked unhappy. "I've always maintained the ancient formalities of this court. I find it worthwhile." "Very likely. I suppose that those of us who have to try cases anywhere and everywhere get into sloppy habits, but we can't help it. Take Minatare, for example. Suppose you attempted out of politeness to conform to their customs in trying a case. They don't think a judge is worth a hoot unless he undergoes a cleansing fast before he mounts the judge's sphere. Then he has to stay up there without food or drink until he reaches a decision. Frankly, I couldn't take it. Could you?" Judge O'Farrell felt annoyed that this glib young man should imply there could be a parallel between the seemly rituals of his court and such heathen practices. He recalled uneasily the 3 stacks of wheat cakes adorned with sausage and eggs with which he had started the day. "Well, other times, other customs," he said grudgingly. "Exactly. Thanks for indulging me." Greenberg motioned to the bailiff. The two started shoving attorneys' tables together to make one big one before O'Farrell could make clear that he had quoted the old saw for the purpose of rebutting it. Shortly, about 15 people were seated around the composite table, and Greenberg had sent the bailiff out to find ashtrays. He turned to the clerk, who was now at his control desk, wearing earphones and crouching over his instruments in the awkward pose of all electronics technicians. "Is your equipment working now?" The clerk pressed a thumb and forefinger together. "Rolling." "Very well. Court's in session." The clerk spoke into his mic, announcing time, date, place, nature, and jurisdiction of the court, and the name and title of the special master presiding, reading the last and mispronouncing Sergei Greenberg's first name. Greenberg did not correct him. The bailiff came in, his hands full of ashtrays, and said hastily, oh yes, let all who have business before this court gather nigh and—" "Never mind," Greenberg interrupted. "Thanks anyhow. This court will now hold a preliminary hearing on any and all issues relating to the actions last Monday of an extraterrestrial creature locally resident and known as Lummox. I refer to that big brute in a cage outside this building. Bailiff, go get a picture of him, please, and insert it in the record." "Right away, Your Honor." "The court wishes to announce that this hearing may be converted to a final determination on any or all issues at any time, if the court so announces, and subject to objection and ruling at the time. In other words, don't hold your fire. This may be your only day in court. Oh yes, the court will receive petitions relating to this extraterrestrial, as well as hear issues." "Question, Your Honor?" "Yes." "May it please the court, my client and I have no objection if all that we are engaged in is a preliminary inquiry, but will we return to accepted procedure if we go on to terminer?" This court, being convened by the Federation and acting in accordance with the body of law called Customs of Civilization, in brief, and consisting of agreements, treaties, precedents, etc., between two or more planets of the Federation, or with other civilizations with which member planets of the Federation have diplomatic relations, is not bound by local procedures. It is the purpose of this court to arrive at the truth and from there to reach equity under the law. The court will not trample on local law and custom except where they are hopelessly opposed to superior law. But where local custom is merely ritualistic, this court will ignore formality and get on with its business. Understand me? I believe so. I may take exception later. The small, middle-aged man who spoke seemed embarrassed. Anyone may object at any time for any reason and be heard. Also, you may appeal from my decision. However, Greenberg grinned warmly, I doubt it will do you much good. So far, I have been pretty lucky in having my decisions upheld. I had not intended to imply, the man answered stiffly, that the court was not properly— Sure, let's get on with it. Greenberg picked up a stack of papers. Here is a civil action, Bon Marché Merchandising Corporation versus Lummox John Thomas Stewart the 11th. That name still bothers me, he said in an aside to Judge O'Farrell. Marie Branley Stewart, etc. And another one like it for Western Mutual Assurance Company, issuers of Bon Marché. Here's another, same defendants, brought by K. Ito and his insurance company, New World Casualty Limited, and one from the city of Westville, same defendants again, and still another brought by Mrs. Isabel Donahue. Also some criminal matters. One is for harboring a dangerous animal, one for felonious harboring of same, another for negligence, and another for maintaining a public nuisance. John Thomas had been steadily turning white. Greenberg glanced at him and said, They haven't skipped much, have they, son? Cheer up, the condemned man always eats a hearty breakfast. John Thomas managed a sickly grin. Betty found his knee under the table and patted it. There was another paper in the stack. Greenberg shuffled it in with the others without reading it into the record. It was a petition signed by the Chief of Safety on behalf of the city of Westville, praying the court to order the destruction of a dangerous animal known as lummox and further identified as, etc. Instead, Greenberg looked up and said, Now, who's who? You, sir? The man addressed was the lawyer who had questioned the court's methods. He identified himself as Alfred Schneider and stated that he was acting both for Western Mutual and for Bon Marché. This gentleman beside me is Mr. DeGrasse, manager of the store. Good. Now the next man, please. Greenberg established that all principals were present with their attorneys. The roster included, besides himself, Judge O'Farrell, John Thomas, Betty, and Chief Dressier, the following: Mrs. Donahue and her lawyer, Mr. Beanfield, Messrs. Schneider and DeGrasse for Bon Marché, Mr. Lombard, city attorney of Westville, and the attorney for Mr. Ito's insurance company, and Mr. Ito's son, acting for his father. Officers Carnes and Mendoza, witnesses, and John Thomas's mother with the Stewart family lawyer, Mr. Postle. Greenberg said to Postle, I take it you are acting for Mr. Stewart? Betty interrupted with, Heavens no, I'm representing Johnny. Greenberg raised his eyebrows. I was about to ask what you were doing here. You are an attorney? Well, I'm his counsel. O'Farrell leaned over and whispered, This is preposterous, Mr. Commissioner. Of course she is not a lawyer. I know the child. I'm rather fond of her, but frankly, I don't think she's quite bright. He added severely, Betty, you have no business here. Get out and quit making a fool of yourself. Now see here, Judge. One moment, young lady, Greenberg put in. Do you have any qualifications to act as counsel for Mr. Stewart? I certainly do. I'm the counsel he wants. A very strong point, though perhaps not sufficient. He spoke to John Thomas. Is that correct? Yes, sir. Judge O'Farrell whispered, Don't do it, son. You'll be reversed. Greenberg whispered back, That's what I'm afraid of. He frowned, then spoke to Mr. Postle. Are you prepared to act for both mother and son? Yes. No, Betty contradicted. Eh? Wouldn't Mr. Stewart's interests be better protected in the hands of an attorney than in yours? No, don't answer. I want Mr. Stewart to answer. John Thomas turned pink and managed to mutter, I don't want him. Why? John Thomas looked stubborn. Betty said scornfully, because his mother doesn't like lummox, that's why. And that's not true, Mrs. Stewart cut in sharply. It is true, and that old fossil Postle is stringing along with her. They want to get rid of Lummy, both of them. O'Farrell coughed in his handkerchief. Postle turned red. Greenberg said gravely, Young lady, you will stand and apologize to Mr. Postle. Betty looked at the commissioner, dropped her eyes, and stood up. She said humbly, Mr. Postle, I'm sorry you're a fossil. I'm sorry I said you were a fossil. Sit down, Greenberg said soberly. Mind your manners hereafter. Mr. Stewart, no one is required to accept counsel not of his choice, but you place me in a dilemma. Legally, you are a minor child. You have chosen as counsel another minor child. It won't look well in the record. He pulled at his chin. Could it be that you, or your counsel, or both of you, are trying to cause a mistrial? No, sir. Betty looked smugly virtuous. It was a possibility she had counted on, but had not mentioned to Johnny. Your Honor? Yes, Mr. Lombard? This strikes me as ridiculous. This girl has no standing. She is not a member of the bar. Obviously, she can't function as an attorney. I dislike finding myself in the position of instructing the court, but the obvious thing to do is to put her outside the bar and appoint counsel. May I suggest that the public defender is present and prepared? You may so suggest. Is that all, Mr. City Attorney? Yes, Your Honor. May I say that the court also finds it distasteful for you to instruct the court? You will not do so again. Yes, Your Honor. This court will make its own mistakes in its own way. Under the customs by which this court is convened, it is not necessary that a counsel be qualified formally. In your idiom, be a member of the bar, a licensed lawyer. If you find that rule unusual, let me assure you that the hereditary lawyer priests of DeFly find it much more astonishing. But it is the only rule which can be applied everywhere. Nevertheless, I thank you for your suggestion. Will the public defender stand up? Here, Your Honor, Cyrus Andrews. Thank you. Are you prepared to act? Yes, I need a recess to consult with my principal. Naturally. Well, Mr. Stewart, shall the court appoint Mr. Andrews as your counsel? Or associate counsel? No! Again Betty answered. I was addressing Mr. Stewart, Miss Sorensen. Well? John Thomas glanced at Betty. No, Your Honor. Why not? I'll answer that, Betty put in. I talk faster than he does. That's why I'm his counsel. We won't take Mr. Andrews because the city attorney is against us on one of these silly things they've got about lummox, and the city attorney and Mr. Andrews are law partners when they're not fighting sham battles in court. Greenberg turned to Andrews. Is that correct, sir? Why, yes, we're law partners, Your Honor. You will understand that in a town this size, I quite understand. I also understand Miss Sorensen's objection. Thank you, Mr. Andrews. Stand down. Mr. Greenberg, what is it now, young lady? I can get you part of the way off the spot. You see, I had a dirty hunch that some busybody would try to keep me out of it, so we fixed it up ahead of time. I'm half owner. Half owner? Of lummox, see? She took a paper from her bag and offered it. A bill of sale, all legal and proper. At least it ought to be. I copied it out of a book. Greenberg studied it. The form appears correct. The date is yesterday, which would make you voluntarily liable to the extent of your interest from a civil standpoint. It would not affect criminal matters of earlier date. Oh, pooh, there aren't any criminal matters. That remains to be determined. And don't say pooh, it is not a legal term. The question here is whether or not the signer can vend this interest. Who owns lummox? Why, Johnny does. It was in his father's will. So? Is that stipulated, Mr. Postle? Mr. Postle whispered with Mrs. Stewart, then answered, So stipulated, Your Honor. This creature called lummox is a chattel of John Thomas Stewart, a minor child. Mrs. Stewart's interest is through her son. Very well. Greenberg handed the bill of sale to the clerk. Read it into the record. Betty settled back. All right, Your Honor. Appoint anybody you want to, just as long as I can have my say. Greenberg sighed. Would it make any difference if I did? Not much, I guess. Let the record show that you two, having been duly warned and advised, persist in acting as your own counsel. The court regretfully assumes the burden of protecting your rights and advising you as to the law. Oh, don't feel bad, Mr. Greenberg. We trust you. I'd rather you didn't, he said dryly. But let's move on. That gentleman down at the end. Who are you? Me, Judge? I'm the galactic press stringer around here, name of Hovey. So, the clerk will supply a transcript for the press, and I will be available for the usual interview later if anyone wants it. No pictures of me with this creature lummox, however. Are there any more gentlemen of the press? Two others stood up. The bailiff will place chairs for you just beyond the rail. Yes, Judge, but first outside the rail, please. Greenberg looked around. I think that's all. No, that gentleman down there. Your name, sir? The man addressed stood up. He was dressed in a formal jacket and striped gray shorts and held himself with self-conscious dignity. May it please the court, my name, sir, is T. Omar Escland, Doctor of Philosophy. It neither pleases nor displeases the court, Doctor. Are you a party to any of these issues? I am, sir. I appear here as amicus curiae, friend of the court. Greenberg frowned. This court insists on choosing its own friends. State your business, Doctor. Sir, if you will permit me, I am State Executive Secretary of the Keep Earth Human League. Greenberg suppressed a groan, but Escland did not notice as he had looked down to pick up a large manuscript. As is well known, ever since the inception of the ungodly practice of space travel, our native Earth, given us by divine law, has been increasingly overrun by creatures, beasts rather, let us say, of dubious origin. The pestilential consequences of this unholy traffic are seen on every... Dr. Escland. Sir, what is your business with this court? Are you a principal to any of the issues before it? Well, not in so many words, Your Honor. In a broader sense, I am an advocate for all mankind, the society of which I have the honor... Do you have any business? A petition, perhaps? Yes, Escland answered sullenly. I have a petition. Produce it. Escland fumbled among his papers, drew one out. It was passed to Greenberg, who did not look at it. Now state briefly for the record the nature of your petition. Speak clearly and toward the nearest microphone. Well, may it please the court, the society of which I have the honor of being an officer, a league, if I may say so, embracing all mankind, prays, nay, demands that this unearthly beast, which has already ravaged this fair community, be destroyed. Such destruction is sanctioned, and yes, commanded by those sacred... Is that in your petition? You want this court to order the destruction of the ET known as lummox? Yes, but more than that, I have here a careful documentation of the arguments, unanswerable arguments, I may say so, to... Just a moment. That word demands, which you used, does it appear in the petition? No, Your Honor, that came from my heart, from the fullness of... Your heart has just led you into contempt. Do you wish to rephrase it? Escland stared, then said grudgingly, I withdraw the word. No contempt was intended. Very well. The petition is received. The clerk will record it. Decision later. Now, as to that speech you wish to make, from the size of your manuscript, I surmise it will require about 2 hours? I believe that will be ample, Your Honor, answered Escland, somewhat mollified. Good. Bailiff, Your Honor, can you dig up a soap box? I believe so, sir. Excellent. Place it on the lawn outside. Dr. Escland, every one of us enjoys free speech, so enjoy yourself. That soapbox is yours for the next 2 hours. Dr. Escland turned the color of eggplant. You'll hear from us, no doubt. We know your sort, traitors to mankind, renegades, trifling with... Remove him. The bailiff did so, grinning. And we'll see if the court can proceed a little more systematically next time.